We had a fantastic first couple of days, and so thrilled to have you here for our closing day of programming. If everybody could come in and take a seat, we are about to get started with our opening panel. Thanks for a great couple of days of discussion. We've got a great lineup today. But first, a reminder for everyone, one way to stay engaged with New Deal all year long is through our award-winning podcast. I think I see Ryan Coonerty has been somewhere around here, our founder. We've loved featuring many of you as guests on the show. I look forward to talking to more New Deal leaders about how you are solving problems and your path to public service. If you haven't already, we just asked you to please subscribe and give us a 5-star rating to help us boost the podcast and better promote all of you. And of course, for the New Deal leaders, please reach out if you'd like to be on the show. With that, we're going to start this morning with a session on 2025 policy priorities that go really to the heart of New Deal's mission, ideas for expanding economic opportunity for all Americans. First up, I want to welcome Rhett, Buttle, founder of Public-Private Strategies and the president of the Public-Private Strategies Institute, which brings together the public and private sectors to build coalitions and campaigns and creates partnerships that drive policy and market outcomes. Joining Rhett will be New Deal Leader St. Louis Mayor Tishaura Jones, John Lettieri, co-founder and CEO of the nationally recognized Economic Innovation Group, and we have Angie Cooper, Executive Vice President of Heartland Forward, which is a think and do tank working as a resource for states and communities to advance economic success. So join me in welcoming Rhett and all of the panelists.
Awesome. That is on. Well, good morning, everyone. All right, we'll try one more time because it's early. Good morning. Good morning. I have to say the applause was actually pretty good, so like the piece. But it's so great to be with you all this morning, and I've had the privilege of just popping in the last few days and, having a lot of the conversations about, where we are and where we go from here. But I think most importantly, to just be in community with good people who are doing work on the ground. And I'm super excited to be joined by this amazing panel because I think it goes without question that, the future of our economy and how we create an inclusive economy that works for everyone is on the minds of everyone across the political spectrum and what we do. And we're joined by some amazing guests who are going to help us figure that out. And then, of course, we want to take some question and answer from you all. So with that, why don't we go ahead and hop in? I thought what I'd do is just to get the conversation going. We would hear from each panelist a little bit about the work they're doing, how they're thinking about the economy, maybe how they're thinking about their priorities for 2025. And so maybe we'll just make our way down the panel, and John can ask for you to kick us off. Tell us a little bit about the amazing work that EIG does and how you're thinking about economic policy for 2025.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here with you. First panel of the day. Everyone's still wide awake and caffeinated. That's great. So my organization is a bipartisan think tank, and so we have to think about things in the lens of where are the landing spots for both parties to come together. And obviously after an election like this where you have federal control in one party's hands, the playing field shifts a little bit from what it could have otherwise been. But I think there's some really interesting areas of opportunity that we've been focused on at EIG. And one of those is the pro-worker bucket of policy ideas. There's, I think, a great competition happening right now between the two parties, which is very healthy for democracy and healthy for our economy, that both parties are trying to define themselves as the pro-worker party. And we can argue about which party deserves that mantle more or less, but the fact that there's a competition happening in that space and that's really the ground of the realignment happening in American politics, I think is very positive. And it creates a lot of interesting bipartisan opportunities to work together. So we're thinking about that both from a research side, but also a policy-making side. One example that I'll give, and I'm happy to talk about more as we get into this, is on issues of worker mobility. Non-compete agreements at the state level have been, for the last decade or so, under assault, and I think that's great. Policymakers at the state level have been looking at restrictions on non-compete agreements because the evidence has become so clear that they hurt entrepreneurship, they hurt wages, they hurt worker satisfaction. They're bad for the economy, but they're really bad for workers, and even bad for employers too. And as the evidence has become more clear, the policymaking has become more active at the state level. That's starting to filter up to the federal level as well, where you have this interesting cross-partisan alignment of a lot of organizations, including Trump-aligned organizations, who are saying this is the frontier of pro-worker policy in this country. So I think those types of areas that are a little bit off of the radar, they're not hot-button national issues, but they are really important. High leverage and low cost. I think as we think about what's going to happen over the next couple of years, there are going to be some big-ticket spending items, but the restraint on spending is really going to start kicking in, especially outside of a few priorities like tax. And so the premium is going to be, where do we get a lot of leverage in the economy? Where can we help workers? And where can we do all that without spending a lot of money? Think about how few issues fit into that bucket. And now think about how many of those can be bipartisan. It's a really small list. I think non-compete reform could be one of those issues where it's no cost, huge economic leverage, bipartisan, and backed by evidence. And so that's the kind of stuff that we're thinking about here in the wake of the election and this realignment that's happening. I think if we can lead into issues like that, that's very positive for the future of the country.
Super helpful. Next, super excited to hear a little bit more about the amazing work that Heartland Forward does. I know you all are thinking a lot about entrepreneurship and rural communities, so tell us about the work.
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning. It's great to be here. I work for an organization called Heartland Forward, and our core mission is centered around how do we help change the narrative about the middle of the country and accelerate economic growth. And we are a nonpartisan organization as well, but we call ourselves a policy think and do tank. So we have a team of economists and researchers in-house that do applied research, and then we have programmatic and policy teams that really roll up their sleeves and think about how are we a resource for states and local communities, primarily working with governor's offices, economic development directors, mayors, and city council members. And it is interesting, and Mayor, I shared this with you earlier, when I usually say Heartland Forward, people do say rural. But one of my favorite stats about the 20 states in which we define as the heartland make up the third largest economy under the US and China. So the middle of the country is extremely important as we look at all the core issues, John, that you just mentioned. And while we look at applied research and being a resource for states and local communities, we focus truly on four main kind of pillars. The first one is innovation and entrepreneurship, and the second one is human capital and workforce development. We really, our work in those two pillars is how do we build the talent pipeline in the heartland? We can argue that when we look at state policy or federal policy and where we're putting dollars in both urban and rural areas, we've sort of separated. Innovation lives in this bucket, entrepreneurship lives in this bucket, and education and workforce development is kind of in a separate bucket. And we've siloed those issues in many ways. So we really say, how do we build the talent pipeline in the heartland? And just kind of everything we do is based upon research. So a program that we're running to help entrepreneurs just get their ideas off the sidelines at the very beginning stages. It's important because we did a report that looked at where entrepreneurship was growing across the country. And unfortunately, 75% of venture capital has gone to just 3 states on all coasts. So how do we get more money? And it's not just capital, it's how do we get more people in the game to think about they can be entrepreneurs so they can do amazing things in St. Louis or do amazing things in my hometown, Enid, Oklahoma, so we can build the talent from the ground up. We also, our third pillar that we focus on is health and wellness. And we look at health with an economic lens, because if we don't have healthy families and healthy communities, we're not driving anything forward in not just the heartland, but across the country. And we've created, and happy to dig in deeper, out of some research that we did looking at rural hospitals are closing and what do we go do about it. We've created a Heartland Health Caucus made up of policymakers across 8 Heartland states. And we've brought together, and groups like this do this, but we brought together the policy director in the governor's office, the Department of Health, and the state legislators that run the Health and Senate health committees. It's a nonpartisan group, and they're all talking to each other and sharing best practices. Some states have already expanded Medicaid, some have not, some have said, how do I do this? So we're sharing those best practices. And then a couple of big issues. We probably believe the number one economic issue of our time is access to affordable high-speed internet. We've got to make that happen. There's got to be a big push. Let's accelerate those BEAD dollars so they get out to the states. And then, of course, AI. So AI is happening everywhere in front of us, and we're looking at it to make sure, one, the Heartland's not left behind. We have the opportunity to lead. We're looking at it from a workforce perspective, but also a sustainability resource perspective. So energy and water are important to the 20 Heartland states that we think about, and so we're trying to bring those policy discussions to the table.
Super helpful. Obviously, a leader who needs no introduction. I was telling the mayor we met over 10 years ago, I think, in Washington. It's been amazing to watch your career. Obviously, from where you sit, you have a unique set of tools as you're thinking about inclusive growth. I know you've been doing a lot of work with the Aspen Institute, thinking about financial security for workers. How are you thinking about those tools sort of with where you're sitting for inclusive growth?
Well, good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Mayor Tishaura Jones, and I was one of the first class. Oh, thank you. I got a little fan base over here. I was part of the first class of NewDEAL Leaders, so some might call me an OG. So St. Louis received almost $500 million from the American Rescue Plan Act. And we deployed over half of that in what's called our Economic Justice Action Plan. And our Economic Justice Action Plan has 3 pillars to empower, develop, and transform marginalized neighborhoods. Because St. Louis, just like any other major city, has hyper segregation. Some may have seen a documentary on BBC called The Delmar Divide. Delmar is literally the dividing line between North and South St. Louis, and north of Delmar is all African American, and south of Delmar is actually obviously not all African American. I live north of Delmar by choice. That's the neighborhood I grew up in, and so my father and I have homes literally across the street from each other north of Delmar, because I got to keep my eye on that 77-year-old man. And our Economic Justice Action Plan, again, was funded primarily by ARPA, but we're using it in a revolving way so these funds last well after the spending deadline has passed, which we all know is December 31st, 2026. And so we've also founded with our community foundation a fund called our Economic Justice Accelerator to attract private funding and philanthropic funding so we can continue our mission long after ARPA is expired. So we are investing in a myriad of ways. So our primary goals are to strengthen neighborhoods. We are building homes in areas that haven't seen a mortgage generation in 10 or 15 years. We're closing the wealth gap by building a new or rehabbing an old electrical facility. We renamed it the Monarch, and it's on Martin Luther King Boulevard because we're trying to change that horrible joke that Chris Rock used to tell. What happens when you find yourself on MLK Boulevard? Run. Well, we're changing that to stay. And so closing the wealth gap by providing resources in community, making it a world-class workforce development hub, co-located with businesses so someone could potentially walk in off the street looking for a job and we can connect them with a business on site. Improving health and education outcomes. We're also working with our school district, working with our hospital systems. We have 2 of the best hospital systems in the country, so working with them to improve health outcomes and expand the tax base and grow the population. Because St. Louis's population at the turn of the century was 800,000, almost near 1 million. And now we struggle to stay just at 300,000. So that 500,000 people left St. Louis for a myriad of reasons, primarily racism, but we won't get into that. But we are trying to grow our population and leaning into our new Americans, because that is the fastest growing population in St. Louis right now. So we established an Office of New Americans so we can connect people to the resources that they need when migrant families arrive in our city. I said when, not if, because we know that that unfortunately being shipped to cities like Chicago and Denver. So we're working with those cities to make sure that when those families arrive in St. Louis, that they are connected to jobs, connected to housing, and every other resource that they need to thrive. So the overall goal is to, again, just make St. Louis that phoenix rising from the ashes, and be another, Midwest city, another heartland city that people can look to as migration patterns will start to shift around our country.
I personally love St. Louis. There's not very many places as a grown adult you can go down a slide. And obviously, if you go to the City Museum in St. Louis, you can be a full-grown child adult. So if you haven't been,
come on.
I'm sure the mayor would invite everyone over. A big theme for me throughout this conference has been, trying to find areas where, we can work together, even potentially with a Trump administration, but also, finding the right moments to obviously, low R resist, or, opportunities to sort of create momentum in our own communities. John, I wanted to stick with this theme of pro-worker policy because I feel like it's popping up sort of across the political divide, whether you're sort of in the progressive community or you're in the more conservative community. I know you guys have been doing a lot of research around workers. Would love for you to speak to that. You and I were able to really successfully work with the last Trump administration around opportunity zones. I think there's a big question about what that is. But I mean, so A, tell us a little bit about your research, but B, do you have any windows, for our audience about where there might be some opportunities to work with the incoming administration?
Yeah, I'll pick up where I left off. I think the worker mobility piece is a big one. I also think connecting more workers to the engine of economic growth that has made this the best place in the world and the envy of the world for so long is that's a big part of the frontier of pro-worker policy and a big area of potential bipartisan alignment. Something that we've been doing at EIG is looking at how do we build wealth in this country? How does the government actually encourage building wealth? It's two main ways. One is through home equity, and the other is through retirement savings. And there's huge tax advantages applied to both of those. Retirement savings is actually the number one source of household wealth in this country. It far outpaces even home equity, and that was a surprise to me when I got into this project, looking at, okay, how do we connect more workers to that? So that first part is true, but it's also true at the same time that at any given time, 50+ million workers are not participating in the retirement system at all. They're not saving, they don't have access to retirement accounts, so they're missing out on that time to compound wealth and to build a secure future. And of course, doing that also gives you something to pass on to younger generations. And so you're not creating that positive intergenerational wealth cycle. That's a huge part of our workforce. Over 40% of the full-time workforce at any given time doesn't have workplace benefits, which means they're not saving, because that's how we save in this country. Which means that the incentives that we offer through the federal government are meaningless, right? Because if you don't have an account, you're not saving, then the incentives don't matter. So that's the kind of thing, something my organization's been working on for a few years to lay the groundwork. And President Trump's chief economist was one of the co-authors of our white paper to lay out that idea, along with somebody from the New School who is about as left-wing as you can get as an economist. And so that's an unlikely pairing, but I think it speaks to how this issue of pro-worker policy really is a jump ball. And if we think about how we connect more people to the engine of growth of our economy, how do we make more people stakeholders in the economy and give them a reason to care about growing markets and the health of the economy, that's a very positive opportunity, and one that neither party has fully captured. I think we see that in our political system, that voters do toggle back and forth quite a bit. And when they think about this election, the economy was at the top of their list of concerns. And you can imagine why. If you're one of those 50+ million who are thinking about retirement and thinking about how inflation affects you today, how it erodes your ability, your margin for error, when we surveyed this, we found that one of the only things that had not improved about people's personal financial circumstances or their view of that since the pandemic was their readiness for retirement. It's one of the highest anxiety areas in the wake of the COVID crisis was, hey, they feel like they're kind of back to normal on their job, they feel like they're back to normal on consumption, but The thing that fell out was their ability to put stuff away for retirement in the intervening years. So I think that's a real area of opportunity, and one where, again, it's not highly partisan. In fact, retirement policy has been traditionally very bipartisan. But you need some innovative ideas and some real organizing around what those ideas might look like to get people moving in that direction. I think that's an opportunity.
Super helpful. How's Heartland Forward, just thinking about I know you guys are a nonpartisan organization, but obviously you're reading the tea leaves, and how are you thinking about what you saw during the election, how that's sort of impacting the work that you guys are doing in community?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of unknowns. I mentioned broadband earlier, and a lot of states and communities have been waiting for about 3 years to get that $65 billion to build out the infrastructure so everyone has access to affordable high-speed internet. And then we still have, and it's not just a rural issue, it's an urban issue as well. And we still have folks, that need the digital skills. And let's make sure we use the funding not just to teach digital, like the basic digital skills, but AI as well. So those are things where we're, really watching and encouraging state policymakers to bring the conversation from the ground up, to encourage the Congress and the new administration to make sure we don't set those dollars aside. Those are dollars that are needed, and people have been left behind for quite some time. It's 2024. How do you do anything without the internet these days? And people are still without access. Just to build too on something that John said and work that we're doing in partnership, a lot of our sweet spot is smart public-private partnerships. So how can private dollars go in and help seed and test to then make things sustainable on the back end? And in the economy right now, and in even big business and industry, we're talking a lot about, companies are announcing they will hire people that do not necessarily have a 4-year degree, and that, not all students are going to go to a 4-year school. But what do we do? How are we educating students and about where their opportunity is post high school? And so that's something that we're really focused on, that will get and lead to where John is saying. But we've helped work with State Department of Education and private dollars to go in and put some advisors to work alongside high school counselors to really work one-on-one of, what are you thinking about post-high school? And an interesting story about it is, and why we have to come together as policymakers, is in the state of Arkansas, maternal health. Unfortunately, we have a big issue. But the education folks aren't talking to the health folks. But we have a student in Arkansas that's a junior in high school that came to her advisor and said, I want to be a nurse. I'm so excited to be a nurse, but I'm pregnant. And what do I do? Well, because the systems aren't talking to each other, it becomes very clunky to help this student get the things she needs so she can have her family if she decides to do so, but then also she can have it start her training and education for nursing and careers. So those are the things that those are real things happening on the ground that we're trying to solve for. And we believe, especially at the state and local level, you can bring parties together and create those smart public-private partnerships to get things done.
Super helpful. I'm going to come back to you all on sort of, trends that New Deal leaders should be thinking about, and we'll do that before I go to the audience for questions. But Mayor, I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about this pro-worker policy. I'm going to put a little bit of burden on you because I am actually going to ask you to talk a little bit about race and how it looks, because I feel like in the conversation sometimes when we start talking about pro-worker policy, it becomes all about white men. And I do think it's an important piece of it, but there's also lots of black workers, lots of brown workers, and I'm under the general belief that strong, inclusive economic policy lifts up all communities, and I just think given where you sit, both obviously as a black leader, but obviously given how St. Louis is made up, you're probably thinking about how to lift all of those communities. Is that fair, and what would you add there?
Yes, so that's why we started the Monarch. It's an old electrical facility, and it's 150,000 square feet. And so we're going to co-locate several city departments that people need in order to thrive. So our workforce development agencies go in there, our Office of Violence Prevention is going there, our Economic Empowerment Center, which we launched also with ARPA dollars, that focuses on entrepreneurship, either helping people start a business and giving them the tools and resources to do so, or if they want to expand it, and our MBE certification, which is important for contractors in order to get contracts, and our plan room. All of that is going in this facility to make sure that we're providing resources in community for people to thrive. And when I think about pro-worker policies, I'm thinking about those people who have typically been left behind and ignored. And we have ignored an entire swath of our city for almost 5 decades. Come to North St. Louis and you will see that in certain parts it looks like a bombed out war zone. You'll see entire blocks that have maybe 1 or 2 houses on the entire block and nothing but grass or overgrown brush or overgrown trees. And so we are slowly going block by block to change that. Also going in the Monarch is our LRA, or our land bank, and the tools that we need to keep up our property that we own through the city. The city owns 10,000 parcels. We are the largest landowner in the city. And so it's important for us to revamp our entire process of how we sell that property back, but also hold those private property owners accountable for the eyesores that they leave in our community as they try to speculate and hold on to buildings until that neighborhood comes back. So we're pushing back on them as well and saying, no, you can't do that. You cannot hold on to this piece of property and let it fall apart and look like trash. So we send them letters and we say, we need you to fix this, or we're going to fix it for you and send you the bill. And so we're doing all of this from this. Well, our goal is to do all of this from this one location, because we realize a lot of people don't want to come downtown to City Hall. It's intimidating, it's scary. So we're bringing resources in community to target those who have been left behind. Now, anybody is welcome, but we're being very intentional about putting this on Martin Luther King Boulevard. We're being very intentional to say to our community, we see you, we understand what you've been going through, and these are the resources we're bringing directly to you to help you improve your situation, to help you thrive, and to help you get out of what you've been going through over the past several decades.
Super helpful. So I'm going to give the panelists a chance to give us each of some of their amazing nuggets of wisdom, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. So I just wanted to tee you up. So John, if you could... We have this amazing room of folks who are doing work on the ground, have an opportunity to sort of shape the economy over the next few years. What would you share with some highlights?
First thing in the morning, asking for an amazing nugget of wisdom is like that's a big ask. I mean, I would think, this is my bias speaking here, but I'm really drawn right now, and I think there's a lot of upside in focusing on things that are not what I would say litigating the premise of the economy. We have a free market capitalist economy, more or less. And I think right now is the time to think about how do we connect more people to the benefits of that system rather than litigating the premise of that system. A lot of what the mayor just talked about, who's being left behind, is a function of people. We know what the answer is. I just talked about retirement policy. We know what helps people save. We know what tools work. Who has access to those tools? Thinking about that connectivity to proven things that build wealth, build financial security, build economic opportunity, and just widen the aperture of who is participating successfully in that system. I think there's a lot of upside there. That when I, as an organization, when we survey the economy and we survey economic challenges, so many of the biggest challenges all trace back to that same theme of we know what works, it's working for a lot of people, and then there's a segment of people, communities, workers, et cetera, who have been left out of that. They don't have the tools, they don't have the access. And those are some tremendous areas of opportunity for bipartisan policymaking, which can yield huge economic upside in just a single generation. And so I think that's really the last frontier and the primary frontier of this next era that we're going into. And it's going to come into play with things that you've talked about, AI and who's accessing the benefits of that, things like high-speed internet. So many things about the future of the economy require us to have a baseline where everybody has access to the same proven tools and everybody has an opportunity to thrive as a result. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Amazing nuggets from the Heartland.
I would just say the time to move is now. There are great needs, and when we look across our states and communities, everyone wants a strong quality of life. And that means a lot of different things of how mayors implement policies in their cities, to how states allocate dollars to the communities and decide where funding is needed. I do think that there's a time to come together and really share those best practices and really kind of roll up your sleeves and get to know the communities maybe that haven't had the attention that they deserve. And not everything's going to be a one-size-fits-all. That's what's unique about the patchwork of our country and the amazing people that live within it. And so I think if we can keep that mindset as the time to move is now, and this is about the quality of life for people, and they want it. And so how do we make that happen?
From the mayor.
So there's an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And so it's going to take everyone working together in order to get through these next several years. And that's public, private, philanthropic, civic, faith, everybody at the table. We've been able to pull together several coalitions around some of the issues that affect St. Louis the most. Crime and public safety is one. We have a regional crime effort that we've launched with everyone at the table on both sides of the river. We also just recently launched our pathway forward to end homelessness, again, bringing everybody to the table. We don't know what kind of support we're going to get from the administration, so we're going to have to, like my dad says, hunker down like a jackrabbit in a hailstorm. So that means hunkering down together, so bringing all of the people who care the most about your community to the table to fund and to find solutions to help us get through these next several years, because and it can't be on the shoulders of government alone is what I'm always pushing back at our community, saying, you can't just look at the city just to fix everything, because we didn't create it and we shouldn't be responsible for solving it. So how do we bring everyone who has a vested interest in making sure that our cities thrive to the table to solve some of these issues?
Thank you all. I think we have some time for some questions. Sir, over here.
Good morning. I'm Rob Werner, League of Conservation Voters, former elected. We haven't really touched too much on apprenticeships, which I think is really important as part of a solution. Not only traditional trades, but healthcare, energy, so forth. What comments do you have on really making greater investments in this country on apprenticeships?
You want to take? Look like you want to.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think it's so important. I was just in Poplar Bluff, Missouri yesterday visiting the local Chamber of Commerce, the local school, high school, and the local college has come together to create a Grow Your Own Nursing Pathways program, and apprenticeships are part of that, working closely with the hospital. And I just saw firsthand, students today and people that are going into the workforce want to know what it's like. They want that access. They want to see it. And so it was so fun to see some of those nurses that were going through the apprenticeship program. And they're going to be, taking care of patients here in the next couple of weeks. And they're getting that real world experience. So then they can go in and figure out, how do I build my career in the financial success that they want for themselves and for their families. So I think it's great. I think we need to get business and industry, public-private partnerships. These things have to happen. I'm like you, like the magic happens when you bring the right people around the table. And so we got to get more people understanding why it's a good thing and where dollars can flow and how we get people in that program.
Well, that's the whole reason why we built this facility in we call the hood in North St. Louis, right? Because our workforce development, or part of our workforce development agencies go in there, and they are experts in finding out where the jobs and opportunities are, and then matching up the people who come to us for services to those jobs and opportunities and apprenticeships. We have a program called Youth Build right now that takes people who didn't finish high school and connects them directly with the trades. So when they finish that program, they graduate, they finish their GED, and then they also have skills that they can go get good union jobs. And so we've had great success with the kids that we've put through that program. So, but that's why we're taking that out of downtown, out of City Hall, out of city government, and putting it directly into the community where people can feel more comfortable approaching that building for whatever workforce development needs that they have.
Other questions? Please.
Hi, Alex Kogan with the Center for American Progress, State and Local Government Affairs. We've been seeing a trend of like counties and states looking into baby bonds as a way to bridge the wealth gap. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to perhaps the effectiveness of that, or what examples of success you've seen regarding baby bonds.
Well, I started a program as treasurer called the College Kids Children's Savings Account Program back in 2015. Our oldest cohort is in the 8th grade right now. We have over 20,000 children with over $2 million saved for their futures. We provide the first $50, and they can watch those accounts grow through good attendance, through match savings, and through parents' participation in financial education classes that we offer through our Office of Financial Empowerment, which provides free resources to help people make better choices with their money. So I thought it was important to open savings accounts because, at least for children, because it's a two-generation strategy. If that child has an account and the parent doesn't, 9 times out of 10, it sparks the parent to then open their own account, because we have parties at the credit union that holds all of our accounts. And so they're like, no, I need an account too if my child has an account. So teaching those lessons of financial empowerment, financial security as early as possible helps those families grow and thrive and make better financial choices. So it's not necessarily a baby bonds program, but that's our approach to addressing swaths of families who need financial empowerment resources.
Bravo. Do we have time for more questions? Got one or two? Yeah. Over there.
Hi, thank you all again for this exhilarating panel. I stand in the state, in terms of state of Ohio, where we're one of the only states in the country that don't give pay stubs to workers. We are a state that is seeing more families work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. And unfortunately, folks with degrees are leaving our state. As I think about what an inclusive economy looks like, I'm just trying to wrap my head around, what do you see are the policies of the future that we should be thinking about? I know we heard about baby bonds, and I know we heard about other things like direct investments, but as mayors and leaders at the city level, I'm just interested in hearing, what do you want from your state legislators that could help amplify building an inclusive economy that really touches the people directly, particularly those within some of the most marginalized communities?
One of the things I want from my state, but I know I'll never get, is basic income. We have a basic income pilot that we used ARPA funds to start, and then were sued and had to stop it, and then a generous philanthropist came forward and funded the rest of the program. So, but basic income is a floor, right? It's not a ceiling. And so as I've talked to families that are in this program, a lot of them are single black mothers. Over 70% of our participants is 540. Over 70% of the families are black female-led households. And they use the money to, it helps them breathe a little easier. There was one woman who was an Uber driver and also delivered, Uber Eats. And she had a 5-year-old at home. And this money allowed her to not work 14 hours a day delivering and driving people around, but cut it back to 8, like a normal person, right? And she's able to spend more time with her daughter, help her with her homework, help her with her schooling, have fun together. But our families are really suffering because of this gig economy that doesn't provide benefits, that doesn't provide the things that they need, retirement benefits or anything. So they're just kind of left out there wailing in order to make ends meet. So I really wish that we would lean in and do a basic income program. We did with the child tax credit that helped hundreds of thousands of families breathe, mine included, my little single parent home included. But getting back to the child tax credit or basic income, I think is a really pro-worker policy that would help families tremendously.
Good question about Ohio. I spent a lot of time thinking about Ohio for reasons we can talk about offline. The challenges of a state like Ohio, I would also, to your question about people leaving who have the choice to leave, the means to leave, how do we keep more of them? How do we make Ohio more competitive regionally? Two big things. One, I opened my comments today talking about worker mobility and non-compete agreements. Ohio is really bad on that issue. So if you have great skills, great marketability, which means you have great inherent mobility as a worker, why would you stay in a state like Ohio where you are more likely to be restricted by your employer as to what your future job options look like versus going somewhere else where you don't have those restrictions at a state level? This is a state policy that the states can take care of, make themselves much more competitive. When I talk to people in states like Ohio and they say, how do we build the next innovation economy? How do we build the next Silicon Valley? Which is really kind of the wrong goal, being, you need to build your own innovation economy in Ohio and forget about Silicon Valley. But what made Silicon Valley so great, in part, is because the state of California has never recognized non-compete agreements. So if you are a great entrepreneur with a great idea, you don't have to worry about retribution from your employer. You can go spin out, start your own company, or go work for a competitor who values your talents better. That's how you get the most out of your workforce. That's how you make yourself an attractive destination, and it's totally under the state's control. So that's one, and I think that's an area of bipartisanship. Two is housing. Got to build more housing, got to make it easier to build. This is another huge area of emerging agreement between the two parties. And there's a landing spot here for, at the state and the federal level, encouraging pro-supply, less onerous housing regulations that just allow people to build faster. Builders want to build. Buyers want to buy. This is not complicated. We haven't lost the ability to build houses, but we've made it incredibly complicated to do that. And places that are the most restrictive are going to lose people who have the choice to leave. That's just the reality. So those are two big areas of both bipartisanship and where states have a ton of control.
I would just add to, we haven't talked much on this, but I think state lawmakers have a huge opportunity to really push and put resources towards behavioral health. And it's so important. I mentioned that we have a Heartland Health Caucus that brings policymakers from both sides of the aisle together to talk about these issues. And we were in Nashville a couple of weeks ago, and they're really focused on where are the dollars going for behavioral health, and again, how are they working across agencies to make sure that we understand the challenges in individual states. So again, the Department of Education has a lot of intel, but how do we equip our teachers to work with students that have, that need the help so they can then get into the workforce? And so we all know it's an extremely important issue for our country, and I think state lawmakers have the opportunity to really drive some smart policy around that so we can get funding where it needs to go. I'll also say thank you to all of you that serve in office. as an organization, we're just here to be a resource, and we do a lot of education and share data and resources. But, you know, I'm reminded of, I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma. My dad was the mayor. He was like, I'm really just a water, sewer, and trash guy because that's what you got to focus on. And it's hard because he wasn't paid, and it's a part-time position. And our state lawmakers in the room, I get too. You have big issues in front of you, and you're run every 2 years for office. And what do you do about AI? There's all these things. So one, thank you, and two, know that there's lots of people out there that are willing to provide just general support and information and data for all the issues that you work on each and every day.
I wanted to take moderator's prerogative and come back and ask a question, then I'll come back to the audience. But one of the pieces that I'd be interested in your insights on, I think we all look at the numbers, right? And, Mark Zandi, who many of you know is the chief economist at Moody's, was like tweeting before the election that this is the best economy that he's ever lived in his life. And I think we're all trying to square that with how folks feel. And a big piece of that feels like these policies that we're talking about often aren't showing up in place. And, when we think about the tax system, for example, we hear from families, it's not always super helpful to get a tax credit a year in advance. It would be much better if I could get something month to month for my financial stability. And I'm just wondering how you all are, from your perches, thinking about how we help, modernize some of our institutions to show up in people's lives, in a more tangible way. And I think part of that is, roads and bridges are great, right? But they take 10 or 15 years, And the reality is we have a lot of technology. And so I'm just wondering how you all are thinking about that from where you sit. And so just any thoughts on that?
Sorry, ask your question again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how you think about how we help government better show up in people's lives. I think that is the most simple way in just feeling like because people feel like the government is so distant or not working, even though we have this like technically macroeconomy that seems to be working really well from these large policies that were put in place, people aren't feeling that, right?
Right. So when I became mayor just 3.5 years ago, we were still using typewriters in some of our offices and triplicate paper. And so we made a really hard push to innovate and to develop new software systems. Or actually, we had already had the contracts in place with several software companies, and true to form, people just didn't want to convert and didn't want to just go ahead and take that leap. So we made a really strong push to innovate and to use the contracts we already had in place to improve our software and improve our processes. For example, our liquor license process, again, was mired in paper, and you had to get signatures of every person within a 350-foot radius in order just to get a liquor license for your restaurant. So we improved that process because small businesses are going to grow our economy, right? And especially with so many new Americans coming to St. Louis, we're actually one of the top cities that people are choosing. And we know that a lot of times they bring food and they want to open a restaurant and serve food, but part of that is having a liquor license. And so we took that Platinum petition process out and instead have a conditional license that people can get so they can open quicker, they can serve liquor quicker, but also so their businesses can get into business in a quicker fashion. So, just some of those old relics we have tried to work through and cut some of the red tape for people who want to be entrepreneurs. And also, again, just trying to make sure that we're upgrading our software so we can respond faster in a myriad of ways.
Anything either of you wanted to add?
I would say, for most people, you don't want to be thinking about government at all. And when you are thinking about government, you're probably ticked off about how long it took to do something and the cumbersome kind of bureaucratic process that you've been subjected to. And so I think there's a real upside opportunity to be thinking about customer service and efficiency and just making things that people need to do or services that people want to have access to much easier to access, much more straightforward, and a much more pleasant experience. And I think we've got this learned helplessness in this country that we should just accept that when you deal with the DMV, it's going to be terrible. When you deal with, that does not have to be the case. And I think for leaders who really lean into that and say, we're going to make it really easy and really enjoyable to interact. I remember customer service experiences that I've had with government that went well because they're so rare. And when they happen, it's like, this is amazing. And it would change my voting behavior. It's that big of a deal. So I think we want, if I'm giving advice to leaders, it's you want to be only on people's minds because you gave them a great experience and not because they have to come to you to remedy a bad experience.
Yeah, I would add to that. How do you remove the friction? Looking at policies, I mean, think about it. Before COVID, in the policy space, we've been talking about telehealth forever. Should it be allowed? Should it not be allowed? And then the COVID hit, and oh my gosh, telehealth was amazing, and now states have adopted it. There's other things that, if I live in a rural community, wouldn't it be amazing if my pharmacist could test and treat my child for strep throat so I don't have to drive 100 miles to get the medication so my child gets better? I mean, there's tons in the health space around licensing issues that are just, we need to modernize these policies so, a nurse can work across state lines and other employees can do the same. So there are still a lot of things out there that are probably what you might say low-hanging fruit that we could modernize really to help our families and communities.
Super helpful. I think we have time for one or two more questions before we do closing thoughts from our panel. Anything else from the audience? Quiet crowd. I can keep asking questions.
What city in the United States is doing this the best?
St. Louis, obviously.
Besides St. Louis. And are there things to learn from somebody who's really doing this well?
That's an interesting question. Are there folks you all are watching?
Yeah, I think there's great places like Tulsa, Oklahoma that are really trying to rebuild their city, bring workforce to the area. There's some great places in North Carolina that are places to watch. I think the verdict is still out too. We say all the time, are people really moving from the coast to the middle of the country? What will that look like? I think some, and I'll speak just for the Heartland, while the Nashvilles and the Austins are amazing, when we're sitting down with economic development directors, we're saying, no, you be you. Because, and learn from the rapid growth of those two communities, but you don't need to be the next Nashville and Austin. And I think some of the things, there's great things happening in Cincinnati, or places to watch. But I will say all the places to watch are because of great leaders.
I would say personally, I watch Cincinnati, Cleveland, I think are two cities that are doing the right things and making those investments in the infrastructure, in the government infrastructure, in order to move their cities forward. Changing those old norms, those old policies, cutting the bureaucratic red tape to make it to make government easier to understand, easier to participate in, and easier to navigate.
And we haven't talked a ton about AI, and so I did want to ask a question about AI, but before I'm selfish, does anyone else have a question? Awesome. So I'm just wondering if any of you have how you all are thinking about sort of AI and the way that it's going to approach policy and sort of how you're thinking about tackling it from each of your different purviews.
We're being very cautious. Right now we have, we're just using it, I would say, internally. And looking at other tools that we can use. Our IT director is fantastic and keeps his finger on the pulse of emerging technology, and he has worked with our staff to draft like initial policy about the use of AI, especially in government, because that could be dangerous at times. So we're being very cautious, but still, keeping our eye on different tools that we can use.
We're in the education mode, so we've hosted a number of convenings with state lawmakers, business and industry entrepreneurs, really to get them talking. The first time around the table, the entrepreneur had no idea that the state of Tennessee, has already passed some legislation and a workforce planning on AI, and so we're just really getting people to be aware of what's happening. But it's really important. So a few stats. So between 2019 and 2023 at the state level, and you guys, I'm saying things that you all know, but between that time period of 19 and 23, there were 29 bills that were introduced around AI on a variety of different topics. So far, just this year, there's over 600 pieces of legislation across the country. So we've got to educate ourselves, and then we've done some public opinion polling around people in the Heartland, and interesting stats, again, a poll is a poll, but in the Heartland, over 95% of people that we polled think it should be regulated. I don't have to tell you, if you ask that question on any issue about regulation, that is not with the number that comes back in the Heartland. But then what's also interesting is 65% of the people that we polled think that their employer should teach them how to use AI. So there's some good things that we should think about, to your point, like let's be smart, let's not rush this from a policy perspective, but let's educate ourselves.
I'll offer two thoughts. One is when we asked workers in a big national survey recently if they think about emerging technology, and AI is kind of the most obvious one, whether they see that as a threat or an opportunity for their careers, overwhelmingly they said it's an opportunity. American workers are techno-optimists. They're not, in spite of all the fear-mongering I think that happens in the press, they're generally not scared of what technology is going to bring or how it's going to affect their jobs. But what's going to happen in AI over the next couple of years is going to be so transformative and going to happen so fast that I really worry that policymakers will be playing catch-up throughout that whole process. I think that's inevitable. So to end on a little bit of a downer, I think there's really not much to do to get ahead of the technological frontier here. And I would say, zooming all the way out, we want to make sure that that frontier happens primarily in this country, and that's the first order priority because of the implications down the road for national security. So.
Great. We're bumping up against time, but I just interview any closing thoughts, anything you want to leave you didn't get to share.
When we talk about this inclusive economy, just make sure that you notice who's not at the table and try to bring them there. That's what an inclusive economy is. A lot of times I look around at, especially in my table in the mayor's office, and try to see who's not represented, and try to see what their needs are and see if you have the resources or the capacity to meet them. Because it's going to take all of us in order to get through these next few years, but it's also, this is going to happen on the local level. Our local economies are going to be driving the innovation and driving inclusiveness for many, many years to come.
I'd say ditto.
I'll just use my time to say thank you and kudos to Debbie and this whole group. This is an amazing organization. I've had the privilege of knowing you guys for a while. One of the best organizations in the country. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for the network that you guys have to do great policymaking together across the country in this upcoming 2 years, and I'm really excited to see what you guys are up to.
Absolutely. Well, it takes leaders of all forms, so please join me in thanking these three amazing leaders on stage.